Hey everyone, so today I am interviewing one of my most favorite humans, I can honestly say, Bobby Hedglin-Taylor, trapeze artist, Broadway writer, author now. Just the amount of stuff he's done in his life has been phenomenal. But during the pandemic, he sent me a copy of a book that he used to act as therapy for him during the loss of his mother, who he had lost after several years of going through dementia with her. And this video contains a bit of cursing. I usually don't curse in my videos, but when the book title cover is "Shit My Mama Says," there's going to be cursing. So if you don't want to hear that, get off the video. But we're going to interview Bobby. He is a resident of New York, was right in the thick of things at the height of the pandemic. And so this is part one where we kind of dive in right into his loss of his mom and talking through the funeral and what he went through. And then touch us on video two, where we talk about the 30 people that he lost over the last 3 years and just the magnitude of loss that he has encountered and how he has worked through that, how he's dealt with that. And this man is hilarious as well. So let's jump into it.
But she sent me the sweetest message. Because when I send people the book, I don't send it like I love the fact that you want to talk about it,
Yeah.
but when I send it to a creator, I send it because I feel like they would enjoy it. And if they enjoy it enough that they want to put it on their channel, that's great. But that's never been my focus with this book. It's more about getting her message out there. And she makes people laugh, still to this day. My mom makes people laugh. And that's,
That's awesome.
that's the one thing that's the one thing that I can say that I actually am, you know, it's not, it was the blessing in the passing. You
Yeah.
know, no death is funny. No matter what, no matter what you say, no matter what you do. And for me, it was pretty traumatic in the way that um, it was the pandemic. We were talking on FaceTime every day. We weren't seeing each other in person. So it was 10 days that I didn't get to see her. And that morning when they called me and they were like, "Well, do you want to come sit with the body?" And I said, "Sure, do people do that?" So I assumed I would walk in and she would be, uh, at least not cosmetized or anything like that, but at least presentable to a way. But she was actually naked under a sheet of plastic,
Oh my
and it was like and wrapped up like in a shroud, So I didn't even like get a chance to see her again. And also that was also a precaution, and I didn't realize that at that time. Like even going, the reason we knew she died of I can say the cocoa, right?
God.
The,
Yes.
she had the cocos. So, um, was we she died on a Saturday morning. We got her to the funeral home within 2 hours, made the arrangements for cremation because they weren't doing any visitation. They were not doing any burials or anything like that. Plus, I'm in New York. My father's buried in Pennsylvania. They didn't want to cross state lines with the body. And I heard, now this could be completely hearsay or what I heard from one of the funeral directors, but there are different embalming laws in New York and Pennsylvania. So in essence, she would have to be embalmed in New York and re-embalmed in Pennsylvania.
Not so
Or
much.
I forget the whole like, but there was something about, but there was no way I was going to be able to afford a $20,000 funeral at the beginning of lockdown.
Right.
So we opted for, and mom always said, cremation is fine. And it's because of your channel and Caitlin's channel that I learned the word direct cremation, an alternative container. So, I could walk in and I could say and be empowered with, yes, I'm dealing with extreme grief right now. I was also sick. And
Mm.
that's how we knew she had the cocos, is because I woke up with 104 fever the next
Mm.
morning.
Oh my God.
And that's how it all came together, because the last day that we were together, was just the time period between the time she got sick to the time that I got sick.
Oh,
And yeah, and at that time, I think the incubation period was like 2 weeks. So it was right in there. And so, I had to call the funeral home again and say, hey, I got the Cocos. So, to make sure staff can make sure that they're safe. We all wore masks in the office and
yeah.
whatnot. But and then it took roughly 6 weeks to get her ashes back because all of the cremation machines were backed up. And they
Yeah.
can only do
New
like
York was
12 a day, right?
crazy. Yeah, New York was crazy. They were running
Yeah.
24/7, and people would drive for hours to
Hmm.
get to there, and they would say, okay, we're gonna open the line up at 5 a.m. and start processing, and however many we get in, we get in,
Yeah.
and then they would send everybody home.
Yeah.
And it was a crazy, crazy
Yeah. I took photos because the funeral home already had a refrigerator truck in the parking lot. And that's how I knew we were in for a long road. Like so I live in Queens, New York, which was the outbreak.
Mhm.
Elmhurst is where the New York outbreak because I'm close to the two airports, and so there were rumblings here and there, and people started to get sick at the nursing home, and so I would get a call from my mother's nurse, "Hey, somebody tested positive for the flu. We're giving everybody Tamiflu." And so I'd have to sign off on that and oh, we're giving everybody this particular thing. And then the masks were required when you're visiting and then and speaking of frozen, the New York City shut down visitation to nursing homes on March 11th. I saw my mom on the 10th. I was going back to see her on the 11th and then they shut down. And by the grace of God, I got a free ticket to see Frozen on Broadway. And I thought, okay, I can at least go see a Broadway show and just like escape with
Right.
this is tension right now. And it was the last matinee of that show before
Oh,
lockdown.
wow.
So I got to see the last two one of the last two performances before before it was closed. And then she died like 10 days later. So yeah, so it was a very scary time. We had, and we also had makeshift morgues built on the sidewalk in front of every hospital. I would go out for a walk just to get out of the house, and there's a hospital down the block. And I was like, what is this, this huge structure? And then I saw it on the news, and that explained, but it was just terrifying, especially just losing my mom to this mysterious disease and then finding out I had it
Hmm.
and my partner had it as well. He's a unicorn. He was fine in 4 days. I was sick for a good 6 weeks to 2 months.
Okay.
I couldn't walk more than 3 blocks without being winded, and then it took a good 2 months before I could walk to our second supermarket, which was 12 blocks away.
Mm.
It took 2 hours to get into the supermarket. You had to wait online. They only let 10 people in at a time every half hour, and you had 30 minutes to get in and out. If you didn't get all your stuff within 30 minutes, you either had to go or people would just abandon their cart and just walk out. And because they were literally ushering people in and out as quickly as possible. Um,
So I mean, your mom's death really kind of started the onslaught of death around you for the
yeah,
last few years.
yeah.
How many people would you say you have lost in your friend circle and family circle in the last, 3 years?
In the last 3 years, it's a total of 29 people. I think actually it's 30 people. My uncle Vincent died a month ago, right before Christmas. But he had cancer. So the thing is, of those 30 people, most died of COVID. There were, let me see, one, two. There's two relatives that had cancer. Another three relatives had, oh no, another two relatives had strokes. So, but the thing is, they also had COVID as well. So I don't know if that stroke was a result of the blood
Right.
clots or what have you.
Yeah.
But at that time when it first started, it was like, we were hearing different things about different people, and then we would only get that news conference, and that daily news conference that would come, and the governor would talk about what's going on, what can we do, how do we do X, Y, and Z. Um, and everybody was just like, shelter in place, don't leave your house if you don't have to.
Yeah.
And then what do you do? I'm sick. I can't talk to anybody, can't see anybody. We can only talk on Zoom. Um, my job immediately went remote, which was impressive. And we we were able to. I was teaching because I'm a trapeze artist by trade. That's what I do. That's what I've been doing for the past 37 years. So you can't teach trapeze from your living room, and if you can, you're probably doing something else with that trapeze. It's in your living room. Um, but so I taught. I used to volunteer at an AIDS ward in St. Vincent's Hospital in the '90s, and a good friend of mine, Joe Spiros, she taught me how to do guided meditation. So that was one of the things I offered in our free Zoom classes through my job was guided meditation. I would write these, and I would get people, and people were like flocking. I had people from Argentina Zoom in just to have a moment, 30 minutes of
Wow.
peace. And then I did a stretch class and a foam roller class because I have a bad back. I just had hip replacement a year ago too, so I had a bad hip. So I was like, what could I do? And that's how we turned on a dime. But then I started to write, and I started to write memories, because when you don't have, I'm an artist. Like I climb things, I swing from things. I'm a singer, I'm a comic, I was an actor, I was a dancer. So it's like I have all these art forms that you can't do in your living room. And writing was never a focus. In fact, I write like I speak. It's like one extended run-on sentence that needs to be edited. But I found that the first book that I started to write was a cookbook, and it was Escape to. Here it is. I actually have the. This is one of the 47 drafts. I know it's backwards, but Escape to Ravioli Mountain: A Memoir in Food. And this is the cover is. I know it's hard to see, but the cover is all cartoons, and all the stories that go with the recipes. Like my first words were, "How can we swear on your channel?"
Sure.
Oh, okay. My first words were fucking reindeer. So that story is in here in the Christmas cookie recipe.
Oh my
So
God.
each chapter has like a crazy dysfunctional family story, and then the recipes that came from either that relative, like my grandmother. I lived with a Sicilian grandmother for most of the 1970s, so I learned how to cook, I learned how to sew, I learned how to make clothes, I learned how to clean, I learned how to decorate for the holidays. You could see if you were on a satellite in space, you could see my mother's house and my grandmother's house at Christmas because every inch of it was lit up. Um, so I started to write that, and I started to like process the grieving process, but then realizing that my family was really effed up and funny, so I started to use that humor, and then it hit me when I started to write my mother's eulogy. We had the cremation, I got the ashes back, and then I didn't even look at the label on the box. I just hugged the ashes. I put the box away underneath the cabinet, and I didn't look at it for an entire year. But then my promise to my mother was, I will bury your ashes next to my dad. I'll bury you next to my dad. And she always wanted that, and I said I would do that. I would honor her wishes. And we couldn't, because for that whole year in lockdown, you couldn't do anything. But then as soon as the new year happened, I was like, I should start thinking about, putting this together, maybe for her birthday. And so I remembered that um, I would share her quotes on my Facebook page and on social media with the hashtag shit my mama says. And so I started to do that, and then I realized, oh my God, these little pearls of wisdom, these little gems, these little interactions with mom are all through my social media. So my friend Sarah compiled them all for me into one spot. And then I wrote our little introduction about, my time with my mom at the time of this book. And then I put all of her quotes together, all the interactions together. And it was so healing. And I would crack up, and then I would share it with different people. And they would be like, oh my God, your mom sounds just like my aunt who was doing blah blah blah. My uncle who put, who put bags of candy in the dishwasher when he had dementia, because he thought it was, he wanted the candy to soften up so he could eat it. Like something weird like that. Like, and then, like I remembered the time my mom almost set my cousin's uh, microwave on fire, like trying to cook baby carrots. And she thought she was putting it on for 30 seconds. She put it on for 30
Oh
minutes.
my Jesus.
So the whole house is filled with smoke. My mother fell asleep on the couch. My cousin comes home and there's these smoldering carrots in the microwave. So all of those little stories kept flooding back and they gave me comfort. And they started to give other people comfort. And I thought, and what I originally was going to do for her memorial was to put each one of them on a card and put it
Mhm.
on the chairs.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
and the one thing I did do, was, at the memorial service, she she made beads, beaded necklaces and beaded, things. They had beading in the nursing home. She made bags and bags and bags of them, and I would keep them. I would just take them and keep them. Sometimes I would give them back to the activities director and say, "Here, just cut the strings and reuse them." But it was like, these are my mom's. This is mom. And I have some of her art and stuff like that. Like this was one of my favorites, um, that she painted.
Oh,
It's a little ladybug, and and so it was like, I treasure this kind of stuff because that's just my memory of her. But it was helping people,
yeah.
and then I said, I'm on this process, and I went to, self-publishing school for a weekend. If you don't know about it, it's actually a pretty good, resource. And they did 12 days of free 1 hour lessons. And then if you paid for the weekend, you got all these breakout sessions about self-publishing. And I thought when I was doing that, I was like, okay, cookbook is going to happen. Cookbook is going to happen. And then I thought, your mom's book's almost done. And my mom's eulogy is almost done. And it looks like it could be an actual book. What if I started with that, went through the self-publishing process, went through the marketing process, and see how that feels and see how that works, and then really fine tune and hone the cookbook before it becomes your next book. And that's what I've been doing. Editing is hard. It is not my wheelhouse. I hate it more than anything. I have really great friends who have been helping me. My friend Susie, God bless her. She's an editor, writer. She's brilliant, brilliant person. Um, Amazing amounts of advice, but she became my accountability buddy during the pandemic. And I would be testing out my recipes because cooking was way to heal. And I would leave a bag on my mailbox, and so she could come and get it. And then as things lightened up over the summer, I would open up my garage. I would put two chairs 6 feet apart with a little table in front, and then I would make, infused cocktails. I think I sent you a couple of my
Yeah.
infused cocktails, recipes. But we would sit there and then we would just chat. It was just somebody to be accountable, somebody else to talk to, and just to be outside to have some kind of connection. And then I reconnected with a good friend from high school who's in Sweden, and we Zoom every Sunday. And she's another one she's a translator, she's an editor. So I have been surrounded by beautiful people who are supporting the project. And then my friend Deb just flat out was like, I wanna support you. I want to support this project. And so she helped me find my final editor. So
So when
it's
did you publish? When did this first
um
come out?
so Mom's memorial was a August 14th, 2021,
Okay.
and this came out July of 2021. So it literally came out right before her memorial. And I didn't tell people until after the memorial was over. I didn't launch it. And I didn't, the reason was is we had lost 6 relatives at that time. So we had a group funeral, for 6 people.
Mm.
And, some had already been interred, but it was a memorial for all of them. So I didn't want to showboat everybody's, even though we had my mom's graveside,
Right.
she was the only one being interred and some were scattered. It would have been showboating. But I gifted everybody one in the mail the next week. And I said, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. This is what I did for my mom, blah, blah, blah. And then I did a book launch, and then I did 100 podcasts in one year. which I highly recommend anybody who's writing a book for the first time and doing their own publicity. If you're self-publishing, you're also self-marketing. And
Mhm.
that's one of the things is self-publishing school, one of the tips, because every podcast has a different reach, and every person that is in your life will learn from the podcast that you're on because they're going to watch the podcast. And so it's a great way of exchanging information and learning about new people. And also, like, like from you, uh, Caitlin, there was I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but there's a couple of people who cleaned headstones,
Yeah.
and so it's like they have I became, it wasn't that I was obsessed with death, but I'd always feared the funeral industry because it was always this looming scary thing. And I had been around death my whole life because was raised on a farm, so animals would die constantly, and then when people would die it was always very different. And I'm Sicilian, so Italians, we're dramatic. I mean, people throw dishes, they scream, and that's just during sex, but when it comes to like funerals, like people throwing themselves on the casket and screaming and hollering, that's the way we process grief. I mean, that's the way my family at least processed grief. So it was always this very scary time, but it demystified all that. And I became interested in the process and what embalming actually is, what cremation actually is, and not to be afraid of it, but to embrace it and to also be able to, um, you know, be empowered in when you're walking into certain situations. Like I said, I walked into my mother's funeral home where I just said, we just want a direct cremation in an alternative container. We'll have a service at a later date.
Yeah.
Period. And it still is. I would have never been able to say that. And who knows what at that point they would have tried to upsell, but they didn't. And they were the kindest. This was one of the best experiences I've ever had with any business because the funeral home is around the corner from my house. So I would have to walk past the refrigerator trucks to go to the supermarket. And knowing that my mom was probably in there.
Yeah.
And that was one of the hardest things because it's like it did never settled with me. It was just always that awkward. Mom's in the refrigerator, you know what I
How
mean?
can you wrap your mind around that? Like it's
No,
really not a thought that you can ever, I think, fully embrace is where is my dead loved one currently? Oh, they're laying on a table in a cooler. They're in a refrigerator truck.
right.
They're in a back room. They're in the morgue at the hospital. I think it's easier to block out some of those thoughts. Otherwise, they would drive you crazy, especially if it's a child or a
Oh,
spouse, or you know what I mean? Especially certain situations are more than others.
yeah.
And I mean, you had gone through a lot with your mom in the dementia. And did she get diagnosed with Alzheimer's?
No.
Or just this
And
dementia
it
phase?
was it was just and this was the thing. Um, the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's was explained to me by the one doctor, and he said, if I show a dementia patient a set of keys, they'll know that they're keys, but they don't know which key unlocks which lock. If I show it to an Alzheimer's patient who's progressed, they don't know what keys are,
Hmm.
or they forget what keys are. So it attacks a different part of the brain. She knew me, she knew my partner, she knew my cousins. She she thought she was seeing cousins that were working there that had passed on. She's
Hmm.
like, "Oh, that's your cousin Angelina." And I was like, "Oh, she looks just like Angelina, Mom, but that's not Angelina." But I also, like she would talk about my dad in the present tense, like, "When is your dad going to come visit me?" And I'm like, "Oh, soon." So
Oh, stop.
but I was like, but that's me. You see, this is the other thing I learned from my mother. When she was in a tense situation, she would change the energy of the room by making a joke. She was a brilliant comedian and she didn't know it. We had stand-up comedy in our home all my life. She had everything on vinyl. She had everything on 8-track. She had everything on cassette. She had everything on VHS when it was out. She memorized Whoopi Goldberg's 1984 routine, and she would repeat it to her friends at
Oh my
work.
gosh.
She had the timing down. And then when she would make things up in the nursing home, she would quote jokes from like the 1970s record of Buddy Hackett. You know, like she had this indelible like moment where she knew it was too tense, so she had to make a joke. That's my that is my coping mechanism. When I'm uncomfortable, I am the guy who makes the uncomfortable joke at
Humor.
the staff
Yeah.
meeting because we don't like that tension. We don't like that. We need to break that tension. And she was a master at it. And like if we were sad or if we were having a moment or if we were, like I remember being in church for somebody's funeral and we were, and I think it was my mother's best friend, Marcella or something like that. But my brother and I were crying and she would poke us in the ribs to try to make us laugh. I'm like, it's a funeral. You just stop that, that kind of thing. But that was her way of poking fun to ease up, to make it lighter for her children.
Yeah.
And I do that constantly. And, it's a second nature to me. And doing stand-up comedy, it's like it's become that one thing that I learned during the pandemic that I was good at, and that I was also good at vocal impressions because I honed those skills. I could listen for hours other people's voices, mimicking them, and that became my stand-up stuff. And that's what I do whenever I get booked for stand-up comedy. It's like I do my regular set. I talk about being married for 20 years to a couch that farts, and then I talk about, and then I go into learning during the pandemic of all the voices that are in my head, and and then I sing the song "Let It Go" with 14 different voices. But that's how the pandemic sort of spun it. And I'm not getting any younger. Trapeze was my profession. I'm in my 50s with a new hip. There's not a lot of trapeze going on, but I got back in the air recently. I have been flying again, and I have been doing some aerial stuff. I have a new aerial partner that I did a piece, a couple of performances with. We just did a Halloween show, and then we did a Christmas show, and I'm loving getting back in the air, but in this body. Um, I look, I always say I have a belly. I'm in my 13th trimester, so, but that's what happens when you get older. You have to reinvent yourself. And when your source of income, your way of life is completely blocked, you have to turn on a dime and pivot. And that's how started writing and started doing stand up and started doing that stuff. It's all because of the pandemic.
Well, that was I think that's your grief response. Like you said, when you're uncomfortable, and what is more uncomfortable than being told your mom has died, having to see her in a unique situation that in the history of this world of who's living, we've really never encountered,
Yeah.
then having to put everything on a shelf because our world has shut down and having this loss that how do you even process losing your mom in any normal day, let alone when the world has had to shut down? And your response really, I mean, you put it on hold, you put her in a cupboard, you put her away,
Yeah.
and then finally realize maybe I do need to do something here because life needs to move. And you took this beautiful thing from your mom that, she had this dementia. And I see so many times I sit with families when they come in and they talk about how angry they got during that year or 2 years or however long they'd been working with dementia with their loved one because they didn't know who I was and they didn't know this and they combated rather
Yeah.
than some of the stories I've had about playing along.
Yeah.
Oh, they had a fake checkbook so they could write their own checks. And oh, we did this with them. And oh, we, took them to another room and told them it was this and they loved it. And that's what you played along with your mom in this crazy Sicilian way where you guys
Mhm.
did kind of not combative, but you sassed and you joked and that's what some of the story, I mean, you tell your story at the beginning about your mom and kind of working along with her. And then, like page 44, mom was getting her nails done when I was visiting. Mom said, Bob, I gotta pee. Bobby says, Mom, be careful, you'll smudge your nail polish. And then mom says, oh shit, I'll get pink nail polish on my flower. It's, yeah, if you don't like vulgarity, obviously don't buy a book with vulgarity in the title. But it is the reality of I've had people like, man, mom was the most straight-laced, quiet, church-going lady. And when the dementia set in, she cursed all the time and she
Yeah.
was worse than a sailor and she made sexual innuendo. And I've heard people say that and they're just like, we don't even know who mom became, but we loved her.
Yeah.
And that's, whether your mom was like that before or not, she definitely had some serious sass if you read through any of this. But that's what a lot of it is. And it's laid out where, Bobby is telling a little of the context and then what she said.
Yeah, it's just our
Love it.
interactions, because I would go there and it would be such different interactions every single time. And I knew that, and I would have my phone ready. Sometimes have my phone in my shirt pocket and I would record. But then she wouldn't say anything until I turned it off. And I'm like, oh shit. And then I would have to type it in. And then she's like, "Who you talking to?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm just writing a text. It's for work." And
Please tell me, did she have that accent? Like,
sometimes yes, she did.
I love
Sometimes yes. She sounds like an old Jewish mother, but she was very very Italian, and she had an amazing. She laughed exactly like Phyllis Diller. If you
Oh,
know Phyllis Diller's laugh,
love
and
Phyllis Diller.
yeah, she loved Phyllis Diller, but she had that exact cackle. And and yes, the one thing I did notice, because I got to know a lot of the other residents in her on her floor, and she always told me the ones she didn't like and the ones she liked, and so we stayed away from the ones she didn't like. Um, the one day we're at Christmas dinner and they put us with one of the patients that she did not like. And so we're all wishing Merry Christmas. She looks over to this one woman. She goes, "You're a castrating bitch. Merry Christmas." And then so I was like, "Oh my God, mother." And I was like, she really means it from a polite point. She means it from a loving point of view. But she was like that, and it was just like, "You're a castrating bitch." But
Love
exactly, like she had that, and she always had that little twinkle in her eye. But there were other patients that I got to be friendly with the nurses. I got to be friendly with the other patients' families because we would come together at Thanksgiving. We would come together at Christmas and we'd all be there together. And it was like you see the face of the loved one and you see the face of the caregiver. And the caregiver's face is a brave face, it's almost a mask because you want to smile, you want to be happy, you want to be upbeat, but you're sitting at what could be one of the last Christmases with your mom. And or the exhaustion of dealing with paperwork, the exhaustion of dealing with Medicare, Medicaid. Maybe she had an interaction with a nurse that was unpleasant. Or maybe there's a nurse you don't like because they're not very polite. She had really good nurses. Her favorite nurse was named Paul. He was the one who was sort of like her go-to. She always thought she was at work at the nursing home. So because she worked in a factory all most of my adult life, or my most of my childhood, she was a cobbler, but then she also worked in a factory, a bulk mailing factory, stuffing envelopes. And I worked with her from the time I was 14 till the time I went to college. And that's how I made a living. I would work during the day and go to night school. Um, but I would see different different parts of dementia and different types of dementia. Some people get very sweet and very quiet and very calm. Some people would be completely nonverbal, and others could get violent, could get mean. And there was one woman who would scream every time she saw her daughter and yell at her, "Get her out of here! I don't want her in here. She's me. She's this. She's that." And the daughter was just like, "It's me, mom. I just want to say you're not my daughter." Blah blah blah. And it broke my heart. And I was so thankful that my mom went the way she did, and it was definitely a blessing. Um, but it does bring to light like how we process like like I say in the book, like I would smile until the elevator door closed, and then I would
you.
completely have a breakdown because it was just that anticipatory grief of I know this is coming, I know this is coming, I don't know when, But for 6 years, the elevator door closed and I would cry. And then I would, walk home, or because she was only 12 blocks away. I picked that nursing home because it was the closest to my house, because I knew I could be there in a heartbeat, and I knew that I could be there on my way to work every day. And I tried to visit, 5 to 7 times a week. Sometimes I would have to take a day off just because I need. This is one thing that somebody said to me as a caregiver: check thyself before you wreck thyself. In other words, take care of yourself. It's that
Very true.
adage, like when you get on an airplane, they're like, if the oxygen mask drops, put your mask on first and then assist others.
This is right next to my desk.
Yeah,
You can't
yeah,
pour from an empty cup.
exactly,
Like,
exactly.
so
And
true.
that became my mantra. And again, that's why when I said, I originally the book was just going to be for her eulogy. But when I found that people that I was sharing it with privately before it was published were saying, were laughing hysterically, were getting like, this one woman FaceTimed me, tears running down her face. She was laughing so hard. And then she was like, Bobby, I read, I can't even remember which one. And she's like, I laughed so hard, I didn't make it to the bathroom. I peed myself. And I was like, oh my God, my mother's causing people to lose their bowels on their urine now. But that's the thing. And I felt like, okay, I'm going to take this journey anyway because of the cookbook. This is a chance for me to connect with an audience. It's also a chance for me to learn. You never stop learning. And like I said, I'm not a writer, I'm not an editor, and I'm not a chef, but I wrote a cookbook, and then I wrote my mom's book. And it's like, that's the way that I became an artist in a different way when I wasn't able to do my own art, my own regular art, like trapeze or aerial or dance or
Yeah.
theater.
It was your outlet. It was your
Yeah,
therapy, your isolation therapy, which I
yeah,
think is, you didn't get hugs from everybody. You didn't get the support you usually would when you lose someone. And when you were ready for it, this became your way of welcoming it while
hmm,
remembering your mom. And like you said, that anticipatory grief, that losing someone before you lose them. And every time you went to visit her, you're reminded that part of your mom is gone. And
yeah,
it's this like over and over and over little stab to your heart, I guess, that
yeah.
part of your mom is gone.
There
And
was one time she was talking smack about me to me. Like, she thought she was talking to my brother. And then she realized mid-sentence and she was like, oh shit. And she changed the subject right away. She's like, oh, Bob, give me the remote. I want to change the channel. And then all of a sudden we're on a different subject. I don't remember what it was, but it was the funniest. That
oh,
was funny to me, but it was like, oh shit. For this whole conversation, she thought I was my brother. Um, and that was the other thing too. You know, with dementia, it's like waking up a sleepwalker when you confront them with things like, no, your husband's been dead 30 years. No, your mother's been dead 25 years. You know, you they like, because she would ask, oh, where's your grandmother? Where's your dad? When are they going to come visit? And I literally would say, oh, they're both at work. They're working late hours. The holidays come. Whatever it was. It was a lie, but it was a lie to help her not get that because that sleepwalker response is what I call it. Um, I didn't lie to her. I couldn't. And it was like, that's just my mother. My mother knew when my brother and I were lying when we were little. She knew. And you're a mom, when they're not, it's just, there's something about your intuition of as a mother. And so I knew I couldn't lie to her, but when I went with her story and just fed into it, um, she was fine. And then I also was able to calm her. And I think that's one of the blessings. And again, not everybody has the same experience, because there are some people that get violent, and there are TikTokers that I follow, that I see. There's a couple of TikTokers that are documenting their parents' dementia through TikTok, showing people, this woman is feeding a baby doll, and And she, and I remember getting a video of my mother's sister, who was also in a nursing home, who also died in 2020. Same thing. She was feeding a teddy bear, and she was feeding it whatever was on her plate. She was feeding the teddy bear, and it was I think it was beets, and he had got red on his. She said, "Oh no, his lip is bleeding," and she went to the nurse, and she was like, Can you help me? Then his lip is bleeding." And so I would see that, and it broke my heart. But it was the difference between the two. My Aunt Betty did not know that this teddy bear was not a
Yeah.
baby. And my mom, and my this is the other thing, my mom loved babies, and she loved dogs. So my friend Tamika had just given birth, so she brought her baby Sterling to visit my mom, and I have beautiful pictures with them
Oh,
together. And she was just in her glory having that baby. Now, my mom didn't have any actual grandchildren. She has step grandchildren through my brother, but she was still a grandma in that moment. And so those kind of things snapped. It's like there's ways to live their reality and go along with it. My mother saw birthday cake floating in the bathroom, and I was like, oh yeah, that's been there for weeks. So it's like, I want
yeah.
to get a slice too, but it keeps getting higher. I can't reach it. And then subject changed. And it's also about remaining calm when that happens, because we're so reactionary to what comes out. And I live in New York. I've lived in New York since the 80s, and I've walked down the street, walked past homeless people talking to themselves, saying crazy shit. When the crazy shit comes out of the body that gave you life, it's very jarring, and it's very off-putting. But you have to remember, from my perspective, remember that she's in a different reality. And if I fight that reality, it's just going to make it worse. It's going to make the emotion worse. It's going to make it more explosive. And I was able to calm her very easily. And that was one of the again, what everybody goes through is totally unique. Every person is different. Every patient is different. Just like in your industry, every death is different.
Right.
Um, but with my mom, I had, yes, it was a hard time. It was one of the worst times for our entire world. Um, Ironically, my great grandmother died of the Spanish flu in 1919.
Mhm.
100 years later, almost exactly 100 years later, my mother died from the next pandemic. So, but looking at those moments, I was so blessed with the way that I was able to navigate it. It was not easy, don't get me wrong, but I see people who have it so much harder, and my heart goes out to them. And like I said, if this book gives you a little bit of comfort and gives you a little bit of a laugh, then by all means, my work here is done. So
Do you ever have a moment where you think, "Ah, I kind of just wish I hadn't shared my mom. I hadn't shared these personal little interactions with anybody." Do you ever have that, even for a second, regret of doing that?
imposter syndrome, yeah. Um, so here's the thing. Um, I often wonder what she would think if she were alive today and not had dementia, or and was able to realize how famous she is right now. This book it's in over 19 countries. People bought it in Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, Germany, Canada, um, Paris, England. It's in China. It's in Japan. Um, People have bought it because when you're on Amazon, you can pick what
Right.
market, and people have bought it. She's in more places than she's ever visited. My mother never visited outside of the country other than on her honeymoon. They went to Canada, to Niagara Falls. She never left the country. She never flew out of the country. The first time she was on an airplane was when she went to visit my brother in Florida.
Wow.
in the in the early 2000s. So she and my father used to drive a lot. So they used to drive to different places and stuff like that. So her words, her personality, her as a person is in, even if it's one book in one country, she's still in more places than she's ever traveled in her entire life. And my story is helping people in in a different way. Even if you have no experience with a person with dementia, you
Hmm.
can still get a kick out of an old lady. You know, look at the Golden Girls.
Yeah.
My mother was as one of the reviewers. Oh, by the way, the new back of the book has all the reviews.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
so I think I sent you one. I'm going to send you one of the new
Yeah,
ones.
mine
Um,
has just the
yeah,
one Amazon
that was
review
the
on
very first review I ever got.
it.
Um, but Betty Buckley, actress from Eight Is Enough, Broadway star
Yeah.
of Cats, she reviewed the book. Bruce Valanche reviewed the book. Dan Goggin, who created the Nonsense musicals, and celebrity biographer Mark Bigo, all gave they're all on the back. So I got some really
Awesome.
wonderful reviews from just reaching out and sending it to them and saying, hey, if you like it, great. If you could leave a review, that would be
Well, and
fantastic.
that's why you sent it to me. We had talked a little bit,
Hmm.
and you were like, "Can I send you this book?" I was like, "Of course," and I got
Yeah.
it. I was like, "What in the heck?" I think I didn't. I had no preconceived notion of what it was going to be, but I was like, "All right, it's got some cursing in the title. Like, what am I diving into?" And it was just a great, lighthearted view into what dementia can be and your journey and your kind of healing walk through it. And so where can people can get this on Amazon?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon. If you're in Illinois, in it's at the Regalo Bookshop in Illinois. I can't think of the name, the town right now, but it's on consignment there, and there are signed copies there. People can reach out to me on Instagram, and I can send you a signed copy if you want. You'll just Venmo me the cash, and I'll send you a signed copy. But it is available on Amazon and Kindle. The Kindle version I sent you, the updated
Yes.
Kindle version. So that's we tweaked the opening story a little bit, and there were a couple of quotes that were missing, and so I made a couple of edits and whatnot. And the thing is that one of the things I found when I was starting to put the book together and edit it down, it was some of the interactions were hard to describe to people. And because I'm not a writer, I would give too much information and then the joke wouldn't work. And so I had to go back in and tweak some because that was some of the feedback I was getting, like, this one just doesn't land. What was she saying and why? And then they were like, oh, well, simplify it by doing blah blah. And then, so there was the idea behind redoing it too was I just I rushed it. I pushed it to get out because it was around her Memorial time. But I also pushed it to get out because I really I wanted to make sure that my experience was being shared with so many people who were dealing with the same thing, not only COVID, but with dementia as well, because we were separated from our families. So many people had to say goodbye on
Yeah.
FaceTime. And I did, but I didn't know I was saying goodbye on FaceTime the day before.
Yeah.
Ironically, that very last FaceTime, she said, I'll see you tomorrow.
Mm,
And I did, but it wasn't in the way that she thought I would see her tomorrow.
yeah.
Um, but also going through all of that, having channels like yours, having channels that are death positive, like, New York, we just passed
The
the
composting.
human composting. Yes, like I'm like, turn me into a tree, please. I'm done. That is like the most beautiful thing that you can imagine. Like that's what people also before the funeral industry,
Right.
people were trees.
Yeah.
That in your like when you look at a tree, any tree that's over 150 years old, any tree that big was fed by people, but it was fed by animals. Like that's a natural process.
Right.
It's not, this is the thing, like, I do understand the pageantry behind the funeral industry. I understand that it's a send off. People deserve. a beautiful send off. And with for my father, like now that I know everything that and transpired when my father, because my father was embalmed and buried, and and cosmetized and things like that. So it's like all of those things came back to me. I'm like, it was fascinating to know what the process was, because I just thought, oh, they just dressed him up and painted him and he's fine. And there's so much more, and it's an art form in itself. So, there are many people who have their opinions on either side of that, but it's like, choose, you do you choose the path that you want. And that's the same like with writing. If anybody's out there who wants to write, do it. Start with, I wrote my books on my cell phone, on my cell phone. Um, 90% of the time I'm on the subway and I'll just be clicking away and I'll be like, why am I scrolling? I should be and then I would think, okay, how do I get this on paper? And I throw it on there and then I email it to myself. And then I would edit it down. And just remember your autocorrect, I call it, well, I can't say, well, I could say the word. I call it autocock because it literally translates everything to. Anyway, it has a sense of humor.
Yes.
And one of my favorite stories, and God bless her, yesterday was her birthday. A dear friend for many years, but we kind of lost touch. It was Kirstie Alley. We had known each other for a very long time. We met when her children were young, um, but we lost touch. We stopped speaking for a while. There's a lot of crazy on that side, and but vice versa. But love her to death. Yesterday would have been her birthday.
Mm.
Um, she had just done Dancing with the Stars. I just helped her with some stuff with Dancing with the Stars, and uh, she wanted to do a Broadway musical. So there's a Broadway musical called Ballroom, and it's about an elderly woman who falls in love with a married man while at a ballroom, just trying to do ballroom dancing. Like she would go every night to just experience the ballroom, and she fell in love with this fantastic guy. And it turns out he's married. But I said, "Oh my God!" And this was on Twitter. I tweeted her. I said, "Kirsty, um, I have the perfect musical for you. It's called Ballroom. It's got a beautiful score. You don't have to have a great voice for it. It'll fit in your range. It's your type." She tweets back, "Oh my God, Bobby, I have that scrotum on my nightstand right now." So God bless you, Kirsty, wherever you are. I hope you're reading your scrotum. Um, but um, but yeah, autocorrect is a pain in the ass. So you do
Yeah,
need to
I
you do
I
need to
duck.
read.
I say the word duck a lot.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's like
Never once have I meant ducking.
no. It's like my phone should know by now if I'm saying that it's meant to not be duck. But
Exactly.
oh well, that's very empowering. You'll have to
Yeah.
send me the information about like the self. Putting out your own book. I have 3 books I've started, and I'm always talking about that I need to finish them. It's always on my vision board. And I don't ever make the time. And I need to make the time because there's something that's on my heart to do,
Yep.
but I always think it's just this mountain that I'm never going to be able to do.
Here's the way I do it. And I'll tell you, this is the secret.
Okay.
One page a day, or one paragraph a day, or one sentence a day.
Okay.
Don't stop. I'm going to send you this. And
Okay.
it's hard to read, but it says, regular writing lifts self-esteem, helps achieve goals, and relieves stress. It's a wonderful place to count your blessings. Every day, write down 3 things you love. Imagine what your books will look like and what will mean to you years from now. Not just write like you talk, or not years from now. Just write like you talk. That's your true voice.
Hmm,
That's there. My friend Susie gave me that. Now
love
here's
that.
another. I write every day, even if it's a sentence, even if it's a word. If I have time to edit, I edit every single day. Um, and the best thing you can do is go to Google. We all have the Google.
Yep.
Google book covers template, and imagine what your book cover would look like. Type in the title if you have it. If you want a photo, like I have I made a copy of this and of my cookbook of the cover months before I even finished either of them. And I imagined what it felt like in my hands, what the weight of it was. And I imagined seeing that cover and how it, and you look, and I look at it, it's on my phone. It became my screensaver. And just that, it was that powerful to me. And you have an audience, you have a podcast, and 100 podcasts in 1 year. I swear to you, I sold 2,000 books in 1 year.
That's awesome.
2,000 books in a self-publishing. Now, mind you, it's a cheap book. It doesn't cost a lot to buy or sell. So, but you, in self-publishing, you do the work of marketer, agent, casting director, whatever. Join podcast groups that want people to join their podcast to promote their book.
Mhm.
And that's how I did it. And that's how I'm going to do the cookbook. But I'm literally, like doing this podcast, I'm working towards finishing my book.
Yeah.
And you will get it done. Seriously, self-publishing school, it's there are many different things you can do, but if you can do the Author Advantage Live weekend,
Mhm.
it is massive, the amount of information you get. And you meet people from all over the world in a Zoom situation.
That's fun.
And you learn a lot. So I can't say enough of good about them. Now, it's expensive, but I had nothing else better to do. so I,
And one day we're going to come back and cook with your cookbook.
yes,
We'll cook something together and make a cocktail. And
absolutely.
that would be fun.
Absolutely. And I cook live on Instagram too. So anytime you want to learn something and, make something for the girls, like we'll grab a glass of wine, we'll go live on Instagram
That would
and
be fun.
teach people how to make my mushroom lasagna or what have you. So
We'll check out all of Bobby's handles and connections and where to buy the book in the description of the video, guys. And we'll check you on the next one. Bye. Thanks everyone for joining us for part 1. Make sure to check this book out. It's a fast little read. It is full of so much humor. As you can see, there's these pages and they just have quotes. The beginning is more of the story of his mom's dementia and working through, but check that out and watch for part 2 to get posted, where we talk about more of Bobby's journey over the last few years.